Fundamentalist apologist Alyssa Childers built her apologetic brand by spreading misinformation about progressive Christians, particularly in her book, Another Gospel. And she has continued to do so over the years in various videos and public addresses. I don't think she's ever actually interacted with a progressive Christian. Could be wrong. I've never seen it. I wrote a book critiquing her a few years ago called Progressive Christians Love Jesus Too. But of course, she continues to post videos, and she's recently posted several videos criticizing progressive Christianity. So in this video, I want to take a look at one of her videos where she talks about like four areas of theology where progressive Christians are rejecting Orthodox Christianity. So we're going to watch the video and then offer a point-by-point critique as we work through it. Okay, so here you can see it's theological shifts in progressive Christianity, creation, sin, resurrection, and eternity.
I'm talking about the thought leaders that are writing the books, that are leading the movement. They are pretty much unanimous on all of these points. And so we'll start.
So the first thing I want to note is she regularly uses this kind of weaselly qualification. Sometimes she'll say, yeah, this is just what progressive Christians believe. Sometimes she'll say most of progressive Christians or almost all believe this. Sometimes it's many. But I don't think she ever gives any clear evidence to support the claims that most, all, or many progressive Christians believe anything at all. She rarely interacts with quote unquote actual progressive Christians in her writing or her speaking. She just makes these vague general statements about what she claims progressive Christians believe. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the first one. She's going to talk about creation and how progressive Christians allegedly reject a Christian view of creation.
Start with creation. The historic view of creation is that God created the universe. He is entirely separate from it. He's not a part of the universe. He's transcendent, but he's also immanent, and he's omnipresent, which means he's everywhere all at the same time because he can't be contained by physical matter. But many, maybe not all, but many progressive Christians hold to a view called panentheism, which teaches that when God created the universe.
Okay, so she said all, almost all, and now it's many. So you're like, okay, how many is it? Is it all? Almost all? Many? Some? None?
Universe, he poured his spirit into all matter, and so then at a certain in a certain way of understanding it, it's like he filled the universe like a hand fills a glove, and then there becomes a sense in which he's sort of interdependent with the universe. So that would be the more progressive Christian view of creation. Well, then we get to fall. Christian.
Okay, so let's talk about this view of creation. So Childers here is contrasting what she calls the Orthodox Christian view with a progressive Christian view, which she characterizes as panentheistic. First of all, let's talk about what panentheism is. Panentheism means pan, everything, and in theism, God. So God is in everything. It's a particular way of thinking about the God-world relation. The reality is that panentheism as a model or a family of models of the God-world relation goes back to the patristic era and has been considered and defended and endorsed by theologians for 1800 years, maybe more. You can find panentheism in historic Middle and Neoplatonic models of the God-world relation. In the modern era, you can also find it in process theistic models, stemming from people like Alfred North Whitehead and Charles Hartshorne, down to contemporary theologians like Thomas J. Oord, and very influential within the theology science dialogue. So theologians who work on the models of how God interacts with the world in terms of natural science. People like Philip Clayton, for example, have been very influential in defending this view. It's also been mainstream in large portions of systematic theology in the 20th century, including the Lutheran tradition and people like Jürgen Moltmann and Wolfhard Pannenberg, who are two of the most influential Protestant theologians of the 20th century. In other words, panentheism, whatever else you think of it, is a thoroughly mainstream and orthodox understanding of the God-world relation. So it's frustrating to me, and I don't know to what degree Alyssa Childers here is actively spreading disinformation and to what degree she just is unfamiliar with the discipline of systematic theology and historic theology and doctrine. But I think it is a significant problem in her analysis. Panentheism, as such, is not contrary to orthodoxy. Now, the other thing I'll say is personally, I'm not a panentheist. Panentheism is not some essential component of progressive Christianity. There are many people who are progressive Christians and many who are not, who are panentheists.
Christians have across East and West, no matter what they end up calling the doctrine, have this understanding that there is an inherent sinfulness in humanity. This is something we inherit from our spiritual parents, our physical and spiritual parents. And so we have this inherent fallenness, this depravity of man, which means we are bent towards sin. We know how to sin. When we come out of the womb, we know how to lie, cheat, steal, put ourselves first. In fact, every parent knows this. You've probably had to teach your kids to tell the truth, to share their toys, to put others first, to not steal and not lie and all of those things. And that's because we have this inherent sinfulness. Well, almost universally, progressive Christians will deny that we have an inherited sinful nature. In fact, sometimes they'll refer to it as original goodness or original blessing. So that would be the second denial. Now,
Okay, again, she doesn't give specific names here as to who is saying what. So, in one sense, it's difficult to critique her because um, I really don't know who she's talking about here, right? She could just be making stuff up. I will say this. What is common among progressive Christians is to reject the doctrine of original guilt. The doctrine of original guilt, actually, let me switch off this. So, the doctrine of original guilt is a doctrine that we were born not only with a sin nature, in other words, a propensity to sin, but we were also born with the guilt of Adam. In other words, the sin of Adam. We are born with the same sins. In other words, I should say with the guilt as if we had committed the very sin that Adam had committed. And that is a reformed doctrine, which has been rejected by most Christians historically, certainly many Christians. Um, Now, it's interesting because Alyssa Childers here says both Christians, East and West, but in fact, Eastern Orthodoxy has always rejected the original guilt view. And it's also widely rejected in large tracts of Protestantism, for example. Um, so to equate original guilt with original sin is just wrong. Now, if she wants to claim that there are progressive Christians who reject any sense of original sin or fallenness, give me names. Show me who these people are. Otherwise, I don't think Alyssa Childers knows what she's talking about. Now, we want to move a little bit further because she's going to make some additional claims.
in my research, I have not found progressive Christians to deny that sin exists. They will acknowledge that humans sin, but what they'll deny is that that sin would separate us from God. So when you're looking to spot progressive Christianity, just look for this type of language, any kind of language that would say, you know, you might sin, but you don't have an inherited sin nature. You were made good and beautiful. You just need to realize that. You need to realize that you're not separated from God, that you just need to realize that you are inherently united with God. That would be the type of language that progressive Christians would use in regard to the gospel. Um,
Okay, this is interesting. She takes issue with this. Again, she doesn't give specific examples. She always talks about her research that she's doing, never actually gives what this research is. But what I do believe is very likely going on here is that there may be cases where people, when they are raised in particular Christian traditions that have a toxic understanding of human worth, which has set an overemphasis upon sin, depravity, the moral corruption of human beings, sort of it's been called a worm theology, that we're just like a worm, there's nothing of value and goodness in us. Some people are raised, particularly again within the Reformed Calvinist tradition or some subsets of it, they're raised within a tradition like this that they are just not lovable at all. And it creates a sense of self loathing and a crisis of assurance of salvation. And I suspect in many cases, what progressives or other Christians may be doing is trying to do damage control in terms of pastoral theology with the effects of this overly toxic martyrology or doctrine of sin that creates a sense of self-loathing in people and a complete lack of assurance and that existential struggle for one's own salvation. And within contexts like that, to assure people that God loves you and nothing can separate you from the love of God, which is not a progressive Christian, it's Paul talking, for them to do that, I think is just good pastoral theology. So I suspect that that's really what she's talking about in this case. Okay, now we're going to take a look in a moment at resurrection.
Now, when we get to Jesus' resurrection and ascension, in progressive Christianity, I have found that most progressive thought leaders, whether they affirm the resurrection or not, what they'll all agree on is that it doesn't matter if it really happened physically, which historically speaking, biblically speaking, is not a tenable position for a Christian to have.
Okay, this is bad. So she says almost all or all progressive Christian thought leaders they may accept the resurrection, but they don't think it's important. That is just a lie. Alyssa Childers identifies as three thought leaders in progressive Christianity in her book Another Gospel: Rachel Held Evans, Peter Enns, and Brian Zont. Every one of those people is a fully Orthodox Christian who affirms the Nicene Creed, who affirms the Apostles' Creed, who affirms the centrality of the resurrection of Jesus. It's just a lie. And this is so infuriating. Now, it is, I talk in my book, Progressive Christians Love Jesus Too, that there is an interesting nuance here. What do you do with people who want to be a Christian, who identify as a Christian, but who are having a struggle of faith, who cannot affirm historical resurrection of Jesus? Is it possible that those people are Christians, that we should view them as Christians? Well, don't ask me, ask N.T. Wright. Now, it's interesting because N.T. Wright wrote an 800-page book called The Resurrection of the Son of God. He's the preeminent New Testament historian and apologist of the historical resurrection of Jesus. There's no one who's done more for the modern defense of the historical resurrection of Jesus than N.T. Wright. Nobody who understands the doctrine more fully and with greater nuance than N.T. Wright. And yet, one of his very good friends during his life being the friend, was Marcus Borg. Marcus Borg passed away some years ago, but he was a New Testament scholar and very good friends with N.T. Wright. He was also understood himself to be a Christian, even though he did not accept the historical resurrection of Jesus. And N.T. Wright, when they wrote a book together, defended Marcus Borg and saying he viewed Marcus Borg as a Christian, even though he believed Marcus Borg had rejected this very important central doctrine of Christianity. Now, if that's what she's talking about, if this is what Alyssa Childers is taking issue with, that there are Christians who will recognize that people who have doubts or struggle with the historical resurrection of Jesus or don't accept it may nonetheless be viewed as Christians, but with an aberrant theological view, well, then N.T. Wright is a progressive Christian by her measure, and he doesn't value the historical resurrection of Jesus. And I think that's just an absurd position to take. So that's the summary of my comments. The video goes on, her video goes on for a couple more minutes. She completes her talk about resurrection and then also talks about how on progressive Christianity it doesn't matter if Jesus returns because they've already rejected the historical resurrection of Jesus. Again, it's just false. Uh, but because she always includes these weasel words, she says, well, all progressive Christians believe this, or maybe all progressive Christian thought leaders believe this, or maybe most, or maybe many, maybe some. And she can always play with her language and nuance it and backpedal, qualify, so that you can never quite call her out on it. And then plus she's not giving you names, she's just telling you what her research has shown her. This is how classic disinformation and misinformation is spread. And this is just a hallmark of Alyssa Childers' ministry, which is built on attacking progressive Christians. It's just shameful. Now, I'm going to be making some subsequent videos as well, perhaps, if I get around to it, critiquing some of her other recent commentary on progressive Christianity, because I do think it matters. And people need to be called out when they profess to defend truth and they are, in fact, defending falsity. The last thing I'll note is that my book, Progressive Christians Love Jesus Too, is linked below. You can support the author and learn more about the topic by picking up your own copy of the book.